Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska, get any updates to our forecast, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast for that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at the advisory that we do have out. This is a winter weather advisory for snow down in the lower Yukon Valley area. This is going to be in effect starting 7 a.m. on Friday and then going till 7 a.m. on Saturday. We are expecting snowfall amounts of 3 to 5 inches with localized amounts up to as high as 8 inches. The most heavily impacted area will be the Nulato Hills area, where we do expect those higher snowfall amounts. And again, this is a winter weather advisory for snow for the lower Yukon Valley starting Friday 7 a.m. going towards Saturday at 7 a.m. And this is for snowfall amounts 3 to 5 inches, localized amounts up to 8 inches. Down in southeast Alaska, not quite warning or advisory criteria, but we are going to have some stronger winds, and we've been having stronger outflow winds here on Thursday already. And even though this graphic does say for Thursday, we are going to see a lot of those winds continuing into much of Friday as well. It won't be until Friday evening where we actually really start to see those winds taper off. Some of the places are going to be higher further to the north around the Lynn Canal area. We're going to have Haines and Skagway both getting up into the 30s in miles per hour, and then down in the Juneau and Douglas area getting up to around 45 miles per hour. A little bit lighter as we get closer towards the Gulf of Alaska. We're going to have Hoonah only getting up to 17, Sitka 17 as well. Pelican a little bit higher there at 20. So looking at our satellite imagery, we can see that we have that high pressure out over much of the eastern portion of mainland Alaska. You can see the lack of the higher clouds over the area there with some of the stratus stuck underneath that high pressure. We have a system coming up from the south where the low itself is near the central Aleutian Islands, where we can see that frontal system pushing in towards the central portion of the Bering Sea and then moving across the Alaska Peninsula as well, bringing up a lot of moisture and a lot of rain to areas around the Aleutian Islands as well as the Alaska Peninsula and up towards Kodiak as well. Finally, as we look out towards the Gulf of Alaska area, we can see another system pushing through just to the south of the Gulf, headed off to the southern areas of the Panhandle, or to the south of the Panhandle rather, and keeping the cloud cover and rain a little bit south of the area for this time. As we look at the weather for the remainder of the day, we can see this frontal system coming up from the south, bringing a lot of rain and warmer air with it. We are going to see rain showers throughout the central, eastern, and western Aleutian Islands areas, as well as rain throughout much of the Bering Sea to include the Pribilof Islands. This front is pushing further to the north, bringing rain to the Alaska Peninsula, as well as starting to bring rain to the coastline of southwest Alaska and rain to Kodiak Island. However, the high pressure that's sitting over the eastern portion of the mainland is holding this frontal system at bay to some degree, really slowing its progression and allowing for clearer skies and dry conditions for much of south central Alaska, as well as the interior and the majority of the west coast once we get north of southwest Alaska. We're also going to see some fog form underneath this high pressure. We have fog along the Arctic coastline, as well as some snow coming in from a weaker cold front coming in from the Arctic. And then down by the Panhandle area, dry for the most part. We can see where that high pressure is helping to create some of those outflow winds with that gradient headed down towards that low to the south of the Gulf of Alaska. But for now, the rainfall not quite making it up into the Panhandle area. As we move into tonight, as that low pushes further away, we're expecting that rain to push further away as well, and high pressure is going to continue to dominate the Panhandle area. That high is going to extend in over the state still tonight, with the ridging extending out over the northern portion of the state, resulting in some areas of fog developing in the northern portions of the interior to include the Yukon Flats area. We're also going to see some areas of fog up along the Arctic coastline and mixing with fog along much of the coast. Down as we look further south in the area, our frontal system still pushing through the Bering Sea, starting to make it closer towards southwest Alaska. And even though it's slow progression, it is starting to bring that precipitation further inland. We are going to see some rain along the coastline of southwest Alaska, but as we get further inland, we are going to see that transition over to snow for many of the locations further to the north. And this is when we're going to start to see snowfall developing for the lower Yukon Valley as well, starting to get those heavier amounts as we move way later in the nighttime period towards Friday morning. We're going to see that rain moving through the Bering Sea as well and into the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, as well as rain out by Kodiak Island, where the low pressure center itself, not a lot of movement, staying right by the central Aleutian Islands. As we move into Friday, again, that low is not going to move very much, but its frontal system is going to slowly keep pushing into southwest Alaska, continuing to bring more precipitation into the area, starting to push that rain snow line further to the north. We're going to start to see rain and snow in the Norton Sound area, as well as continued snow for the inland locations of the southwest Alaska, whereas as we get closer towards the coast, more warm air in effect there. We're going to see rain along the coastline. And then we're going to see rain showers throughout the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and Alaska Peninsula from our low that's sitting out there in the southern Bering Sea. Also going to see some rain for Kodiak Island area, and as we have that front pushing slightly further to the north, starting to bring precipitation to the southern portions of Kenai Peninsula on Friday. High pressure still remaining pretty dominant over the eastern area of the state. Still some fog out over the Yukon Flats area and some areas of fog along the Arctic coastline as well. And in the eastern locations, that fog is going to mix with some light snow. Down in the Panhandle area, we're going to continue to see the effects of the high pressure, keeping that area pretty dry on Friday. As we look into Saturday, that high is finally exiting off to the southeast, which is allowing for some weaker winds to come back into the Panhandle areas. We lose that pressure gradient that was being driven by that high pressure out over the northwest portions of Canada. Then we are going to have that high, as that high leaves, we are going to have some of the precipitation make it further to mainland portions of the state. We're going to have snow coming back to areas around south central Alaska, as well as less western locations of the interior, Brooks Range, and along the Arctic coastline. However, with the southerly flow coming in over southwest Alaska, bringing in some warmer air there, we are expecting that to transition back over to rain for much of Saturday for the majority of southwest Alaska. Our low is going to continue to sit out over the southern Bering Sea, bringing more rain showers to the Bering, Aleutian Islands, and Alaska Peninsula, as well as another weaker low near the Kodiak Island area, bringing some rain to the island as well as the North Gulf Coast. As we look at our low temps starting on Friday, out over the Aleutian Islands, temperature is going to drop down to the lower to mid-40s. Mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 30s for southwest Alaska, getting colder as we go further inland, into the 20s for some of the western locations of the interior, and then into the teens for much of the rest, dropping down into single digits for the central and eastern locations of the interior. Up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the mid-20s and mid to upper 20s for the Seward Peninsula area. Down in south central Alaska, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the 20s for the most part, colder in interior locations, and then warmer as we get near to the Gulf of Alaska. 42 expected low for Kodiak. Down in the Panhandle, colder up north in the lower 20s for northern locations and near 30 for southern locations. Friday afternoon highs getting up into the mid-40s in the south of the Panhandle, upper 30s as we get further to the north. In south central Alaska, interior locations seeing the 30s, whereas we're going to have 40s near the Gulf coastline. In the interior, 20s for the most part, a little bit colder for Fort Yukon and Arctic Village, only getting up to 18 degrees there. Up along the Arctic coastline, temperatures getting up to right around 30 degrees. Mid to upper 30s for the Seward Peninsula area, and then into the 40s for southwest Alaska. Low 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid to upper 40s for the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul getting up to 48 degrees. Looking at our lows for Saturday morning, temperatures dropping back down into the lower 40s for the Aleutian Islands, as well as 43 degrees for St. Paul. Mid-40s expected for the Alaska Peninsula, and right around 40 degrees as we are in the more coastal areas of southwest Alaska, but mid to upper 30s as we get more into the interior. Western portions of the interior are going to be in the 20s, in the single digits to teens for the central portions of the interior, and then single digits out east. For the Seward Peninsula area, temperatures dropping down to right around 30 degrees, and in the 20s for western locations of the coastline of the Arctic, and in the teens for areas further to the east. Down in south central Alaska, in the 20s for the most part, till we get by the water where we will have temperatures only getting down into the 30s. The Copper River Basin going to be a little bit colder there, dropping into the single digits. into the mid to upper 20s for much of the Panhandle area. And as we move into Saturday afternoon highs, getting back up into the 40s for the southern locations and right around 40 for more northern locations. In the south central area, getting into the 40s, anywhere near the water, and then the 30s for more interior locations. Into the 20s for central and eastern interior, into the 30s for the western interior, and then up into the 40s for the southwestern portions of the state. 30s around the Kotzebue Sound area, and in the mid to upper 20s for much of the Arctic coastline, mid 40s for the Aleutian Islands, and right around 50 for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Friday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands with the system moving through, we do have quite a bit of IFR throughout the area to include the majority of the Aleutian Islands as well as the Alaska Peninsula. With some of those MVFR and IFR conditions making it to southwest Alaska as well as Kodiak Island. We do have some of the MVFR extending up to the southern portion of the Kenai Peninsula, but the rest of south central Alaska should be VFR as well as the Panhandle area. Much of the interior will also be VFR till we get to northern locations where we'll start to see some spotty IFR conditions as well as MVFR conditions, and then MVFR and IFR along the Arctic coastline. Friday afternoon, continuing to see MVFR and IFR along the Arctic coastline. Much of the interior and south central Alaska will still be VFR, some areas of MVFR for the Kenai Peninsula, and still VFR for the Panhandle area. With our system moving into southwest Alaska, some MVFR and IFR conditions along the southwestern areas as well as the Norton Sound area, and then MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. As we move into Saturday morning, continuing to see the majority of IFR conditions out for central and eastern portions of the Bering, as well as central and eastern Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula. Western Aleutians, however, will start to see some VFR conditions. And we'll have MVFR up through much of the western portion of the state, as well as the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island. For the central and eastern interior, as well as the remainder of south central, VFR conditions are expected, with some MVFR and IFR conditions along the Arctic coast. Down in the Panhandle area, continuing to see VFR conditions Saturday morning. As we move into Saturday afternoon, more VFR conditions expected for the Panhandle. However, over south central Alaska, MVFR conditions pushing further inland, especially at higher elevations. Low-lying areas will still primarily see VFR conditions. In the central and eastern interior, expecting to see VFR conditions, but conditions dropping as we move further to the west in the western interior, as well as the west coast, where we'll start to see more IFR conditions. MVFR conditions through much of the Arctic coastline with some isolated areas of IFR. Through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, primarily MVFR and IFR conditions expected, but once again out by the western Aleutian Islands, expecting to see VFR conditions. For the passes on Friday, starting up north at Anaktuvik, MVFR conditions are expected, as well as MVFR conditions for Adigan Pass. Down in the Alaska Range, Lake Clark will start off VFR, then drop down to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Merrill should be VFR throughout the day on Friday, as well as Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Isabel Pass 2 should be VFR throughout the day. Mentasta Pass also expected to be VFR on Friday. Tenuta Pass, again, going to be VFR all day on Friday, as well as at Portage. And then Chilkoot and White should both be VFR throughout the day Friday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have one little section of warmer air out over the western portions of the interior with freezing levels up to as high as 4,000 feet. Otherwise, the surface freezing level is going to drop down the west coast of the state, move through southwest Alaska, then along the North Gulf Coast into southeastern portions of the state. You have some warmer air coming up towards Kodiak Island over the southern portions of the island up to as high as 6,000 feet, then up to as high as 12,000 feet south of the island. For our icing, with our main system out by the Bering Sea and southwest Alaska, we are seeing above 5,000 feet by the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, above 7,000 feet as we get over the YK Delta area, and above 8,000 feet as we move closer towards the Barren Islands and Kenai Peninsula area. Out over the Arctic coastline, especially the central and eastern locations, below 3,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet out of a northwesterly direction over southeast Alaska, as high as 130 knots, and then as it moves away from the Panhandle up to as high as 150 knots. Out over the state, going to see a lot of northwesterly winds, 55 to 70 knots, getting stronger as we move further to the east, and then out over south central Alaska, westerly winds 75 knots. Down by the Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds up to as high as 105 knots. And then on the west side of our low out over the southern Bering, we're going to see northerly winds up to as high as 70 to 80 knots. At 9,000 feet, we are going to see winds rotating around our low up to as high as 50 knots on the western side of a northeasterly direction. For the eastern Aleutians, southwest winds 50 knots, dropping down to 40 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Out over southwest Alaska, south to southeast winds up to as high as 50 knots are expected, and then out over the Panhandle area, northeasterly winds up to as high as 35 knots. Down to 3,000 feet, northeasterly winds for the Panhandle area, 35 to 40 knots gusting through the gaps, and then we will have winds over southwest Alaska up to as high as 65 knots out of a southeasterly direction, dropping down to 55 knots for the YK Delta, 50 knots out of a southwesterly direction for the eastern Aleutians, and easterly flow or northeasterly flow 50 to 55 knots over the western Aleutians. Turbulence all along the Aleutian Islands below 4,000 feet, and then for southwest Alaska below 5,000 feet by Kodiak, below 4,000 feet by the Norton Sound.
Howdy Planeteers, Trace here. This week is a beautiful waxing crescent moon, and there are a multitude of amazing planets visible in the night sky right now, and you can see them with your naked eye. Even better, if you can find the moon, there are a conjunction of the moon and 2 planets happening now. Just head outside after sunset. This is 7:30. Right above this waxing crescent masterpiece is the handsome ringed planet of Saturn, and to its right is the king of planets, Jupiter. This is only visible on October 22nd. But way out to the left, if you follow the ecliptic, that's the path the sun and moon take through the sky, will be little wee Mars, the brightest object other than the moon in the night sky, so it should be easy to spot. For bonus points, between the moon and Mars are 2 constellations. Capricorn is closer to the moon, and Aquarius closer to Mars. Enjoy the view, and keep looking up.
Ever been to the beach and noticed litter like plastic bottles or foam takeout containers on the sand? Or maybe you've been to a river or bay where there's a bag or a car tire stuck in the mud on the shore, or a bunch of deflated balloons that say happy birthday floating in the water? All of that junk in the water or on the shoreline is considered marine debris. It's anything solid and man-made in the ocean or Great Lakes that is not supposed to be there. And anything people use every day can become marine debris if they don't dispose of it properly. And I mean anything. The most common items we find when we do shoreline cleanups are plastics. But we also find rubber, cloth, glass, metal, and paper litter. Sometimes the debris is so tiny, like a plastic microbead from your face wash, that you can barely see it in the water. Marine debris is more than just trash in the ocean. Sometimes fishers lose their gear like fishing traps, nets, or fishing line, and it continues to drift through the water, catching animals for a long time. We call that derelict fishing gear, and it's marine debris. Have you ever seen an old boat left behind on a shoreline? Abandoned and derelict vessels are also marine debris. So let's review. Anything we use every day can become marine debris if we don't dispose of it properly or if it goes into the water by accident. Marine debris can be very small or can be very big, and anything in between. But most importantly, marine debris is one of the biggest pollution problems facing the world's oceans and waterways today.
How does marine debris impact the ocean, animals, and me? Would you want to swim in a beach littered with trash? Of course not. And the animals who live in the ocean don't either. The difference is, they don't have a choice. Marine species often get tangled in debris, from fishing nets to six-pack rings. If they get caught, they could get injured or even die. And even if they don't get entangled, many animals mistake plastic debris for food and eat it. This fills their stomach with junk they can't digest. Debris can also damage important habitats, like coral reefs, by breaking or smothering them. Corals serve as the base of the marine ecosystem, and impacts here can be felt all the way to you and me. Plus, plastics have harmful chemicals in them. Fish eat plastic, we eat fish. The question is, can those chemicals harm us? Marine debris also hurts the economy. It costs a lot of money to clean up, and people don't want to go to dirty beaches. Boats and ships could run into large pieces of debris too, or get their propellers tangled. We need the ocean and everything in it, and the ocean needs us to keep it free of debris. What can we do about marine debris?
A lot of the trash that's in our ocean is plastic.
And that marine debris is hurting our environment, economy, and health.
The problem will only get worse.
Unless we change the way we consume and dispose of products. There are solutions.
And together, we can prevent litter from ending up in the ocean. Some people might say,
Well, I'm just one person, so I can't make a difference.
but that's just not true.
If each person who creates trash, and that's just about everyone, took action, it would add up to a whole lot of change.
So what can we do?
Well, the ultimate solution is prevention. And we need to keep that as our highest priority.
We can reduce, reuse, and recycle to keep debris out of the ocean in the first place.
You can bring your own shopping bag, drink out of a reusable bottle, and participate in things like a shoreline cleanup.
Join a group cleaning up the beach, or grab some friends and clean up your street. It's easy.
Be more conscious of how many disposable plastic items you're using. And if you do,
Where are you putting it? In the trash can? Whoops. Or in the recycling bin?
so here's the challenge. The next time you finish using a throwaway item, a bag, a bottle, or utensil, answer the question, where is this going? Because ultimately, when you throw stuff away, there really is no away. It has to go somewhere.
So keep asking yourself this important question.
How will you keep your trash from becoming marine debris?
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. In the Chukchi Sea, even with the southerly winds that we have been seeing, not a lot of actual change to the ice, not a lot of melting either. And in the Beaufort Sea, we're having some slight growth, but pretty slow overall, not a lot of change to movement as well. As we look down in the southeast for Friday, inside waters, northerly winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest to the north. Out in the eastern Gulf, northeasterly winds 25 knots, seas up to as high as 8 feet. And then northern Gulf, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. On Saturday in the inside waters, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots expected. Out over the Gulf, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots in the eastern portions, and then up to as high as 25 knots further to the north. As we look into south central Alaska on Friday, strongest winds are going to be around the Barren Islands out of an easterly direction, around 40 knots, with seas up to as high as 18 feet. Dropping off to around 15 to 25 knots in northern portions of the Gulf out of that easterly direction. Northeast winds 10 knots in Prince William Sound, and northeast winds 20 to 25 knots in Cook Inlet. On Saturday, northeasterly winds in Cook Inlet up to as high as 25 to 30 knots. Easterly winds around the Barren Islands area, around 30 knots there. And going to continue to see easterly winds 30 knots through much of the Gulf of Alaska until we get a little bit further to the east where things drop down to around 20 knots. In the Prince William Sound area, easterly winds 20 knots expected. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Friday, around Kodiak Island, easterly winds at 35 knots, seas up to as high as 19 feet on the eastern side of the island. Southeast winds 35 knots through the Bristol Bay area and just to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, dropping off a little bit as we move further to the west, down to around 30 knots out of a south to southeasterly direction. Then on Saturday, staying out by the Cold Bay and Sand Point area, southerly winds 25 knots, seas up to as high as 13 feet, highest on the Pacific side, dropping down to 20 to 25 knots as we get closer towards Bristol Bay and Port Hayden area, and then around Kodiak Island, south to east winds 10 to 15 knots. For Friday for the Aleutian Islands, starting off with the eastern Aleutians, southerly winds 35 knots expected, becoming westerly 25 knots by the central Aleutians, and then north to northwest 30 to 35 knots by the western Aleutian Islands, seas up to as high as 21 feet, highest by the western Aleutians and to the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutians. On Saturday for the Aleutian Islands, starting with the western Aleutians, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots expected. west to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the central Aleutians, and then southwest winds 25 knots for the eastern Aleutian Islands. For the west coast of the state, primarily in easterly direction at all locations, 30 to 35 knots with the strongest winds near the Hooper Bay area. Seas up to a size 18 feet, strongest near St. Matthew Island. On Saturday, still primarily an easterly component. Some of the more northern locations are seeing a bit northwesterly wind, or northeasterly wind, and then more southeasterly as we get closer towards Nunavik Island areas further to the south. 20 to 25 knots along the coastline, 30 knots by St. Matthew Island, and 20 knots by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline on Friday, way out to the east in the Beaufort Sea, westerly winds 20 knots, becoming southerly 15 as we move along the rest of the the Arctic coastline. Down the west coast, switching to easterly, 15 to 20 knots north of the Bering Strait. South of the Bering Strait, 35 knots expected. On Saturday, along the west coast, easterly winds 25 knots south of the strait, 15 to 20 knots north of the strait, becoming northerly 20 by Point Lay, and then becoming somewhat variable along the Arctic coastline, 20 knots out of a southwesterly direction by Utqiagvik, and then easterly winds 15 knots from Prudhoe Bay further to the east. Looking at a recap for tonight's weather, high pressure dominating much of the eastern portion of the mainland, slowing the progression of a frontal system coming up through the Bering Sea. It's still, however, going to bring precipitation to the southwestern areas of mainland Alaska, with rain along the coast, and then snow as we get to places further inland. We do have a winter weather advisory out for snow for the lower Yukon Valley. That's going to start at 7 a.m. on Friday, go till 7 a.m. on Saturday, with localized amounts up to as much as 8 inches. We're also going to see rain throughout the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and Alaska Peninsula, and some areas of fog in the northern portions of the mainland, with some areas of snow mixed in along the Arctic coastline. High pressure near the Panhandle area is going to result in some stronger outflow winds continuing from Thursday into the early portions of Friday as well. As we move into Friday, that high pressure is going to stay pretty much anchored in the same place, resulting in some continued areas of fog in the Yukon Flats area and along the Arctic coastline, some areas mixing with snow out east. The front that's moving into southwest Alaska is going to continue to slowly move in, held up by that high pressure out east, but bringing the rain snow line further up into mainland Alaska, starting to push some rain snow mix towards the Norton Sound area, some continued rain along the southwest coast, as well as the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island. However, as that front also pushes up towards the Kenai Peninsula, we're going to start to see some precipitation coming up to the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.